All right. So welcome, Valerie Bowden to the Mother Tree
Thank you.
Network.
I'm excited to be here.
Yes, we're really happy to have you here. The Mother Tree Network, as you know, is where earth wisdom and spirituality meet racial justice and women's leadership. So, we always begin every conversation, Valerie, with a question. And before I to ask you that question, let me just tell everyone a little bit about you so they know who you are or who you are to me. You can get Valerie's bio in our show notes, but who I know her to be is the founder of the organization called Cradle, which basically connects people in the African continent, talented entrepreneurs, and people with skills with people in the global marketplace who need support, but who don't necessarily right now get that support from Africa. So Valerie helps people to make the connection so that your dollars and your values can line up with yeah, so your dollars and values can line up. And if you have an interest in the growth and development of Africa and Africa's contribution to the rest of the world, then Cradle is a great place to live that out. But Valerie's also special because she lived a long time in Ethiopia. She married into an Ethiopian family and has two small children, one of whom was born in Ethiopia, and so brings that lived experience with her wherever she goes. So really happy to have you here, Valerie.
Thank you so much. That was such a nice introduction. Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad you liked it. So Valerie, tell us what is good. What's good to you today?
What's good to me today? I am loving being a mom of two small kids. It's kind of like a juggling act at times, but I think what's good for me is that my baby's only 5 months old. So we've kind of like, I think, officially settled into that two-kid life. We're sleeping through the night again. So I feel like a human. And we have today we did some really cool talent placing. Like we had this really cool Ethiopian who I really wanted to find a good job for, and we just connected her to like the perfect job, and that felt really good. So those are probably the two top things on my mind today.
Wow, that is beautiful. First of all, I have to say, I'm amazed you're sleeping through the night if your baby's only 5 or 6 months old.
Yeah. We started about a month ago, and I think it took us a while to get there, but we're finally sleeping through the night, and it feels so
Wow. Yes. Yes. So, and we talked before we started recording, you were telling me how your office, which looks very lovely on camera, has kids'
good.
toys all around on the bottom on
Everywhere.
camera. So one of the things I wonder about, one of the things that I remember from when I was like mothering young children was fatigue,
Mm.
and I hear other women talk about fatigue who are mothering young children or who are still in the early age, the elementary age of mothering, but finding their energy has gone low. So,
Mhm.
so I wonder, how do you handle, what is your approach to self-care?
Well, I have always been a good at self-care because I physically break down without it. So I am that person who needs 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. So I mean, I'm getting the kids in bed by 8 and we sleep. So sleep is a big thing for me. And then I wake up at 4:30 and I do have about 3 hours to myself in the morning where I'm working out, meditating, journaling, reading, drinking my coffee in peace. And then the rest of the day can be chaos. But I have that like early start and then a little bit of an earlier bedtime. And then that keeps me like intact.
I love that. Wow, but 4:30. I've heard of the 5 a.m. people, but 4:30, wow. How is that for you? Does that feel hard?
No, it feels like so quiet and peaceful. Like just for 3 hours, I have pure silence and my soul like thrives on that. Like every cell in my body feels so happy to have some quiet time and alone time.
Wow. I just
Yeah,
every cell in your body.
I feel it. And I did do a switch. I was waking up and trying to meditate first, and I found myself sleeping through my meditation. Like it was a little bit hard. So I just switched and I go straight to exercising, but the music and moving keeps me awake. And then I ended up having like a better like meditation in the morning afterwards, and I feel like a little bit more productive. So I made that switch a couple weeks ago, and it's felt like a really good change for me.
Hmm. Love that. I really am thinking about that, that the quiet. One of the things that I've been doing is getting myself into bed by 10 o'clock or bust. Just
Okay.
stopping and
Mhm.
dropping. Stop, drop, and roll into that bed. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
even if I'm not feeling sleepy, I've just been committing to stop, dropping, and rolling into the bed so that I'm at least resting for, a good 8 hours.
Yeah. And I've been making my early bedtime a priority, but then I realized I was still on my phone. So now I've been trying to be a lot better about like literally putting the phone away before like the last 30 minutes before I go to sleep. And that's also helped me feel more rested.
Mm, wow, that's really great. And then the other thing that you said that you were feeling what was good for you is that you had just placed someone in Ethiopia with an assignment.
Yes. So we're still finalizing, but it's like this Ethiopian girl who literally went to Oxford, super educated, super talented. She comes back to Ethiopia, cannot find a job. And there's there's just like millions like her who are just like really well educated, really great skill set, and then just cannot find opportunities. And so we finally connected to like a medical company in the US. And so we're getting ready to try to match make them now. But it's like so exciting to see how like one business in the US really wanted talent, and then one really educated Ethiopian wanted a job and to like use her experience and education for like the greater good. And so matching them was just like, oh, I love everything about this. Like everybody's happy. It's like a win-win. And it feels really good that somebody who spent so much on her education is like finally able to find like a career that can pay her and that's meaningful and that she likes.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many parts of that I want to ask you more about. Well, let's start with Ethiopia though, because I think
Yeah.
you said you lived there for like 8 years.
I
Yeah.
lived there for about 8 years. So first I started off like when I traveled across Africa. So I went through 13 countries and I liked Ethiopia the best. So I moved there thinking I'd be there for 6 months. And I just kept renewing my visa over and over. And I really enjoyed it. And then I met my husband along the way. And then that just kind of cemented the fact that I would be there for quite a while. And I really enjoyed it. And we just moved back to the US last year. So it's been like a year of transition for us.
Yeah. Wow. So you were there for 8 years as a young woman. And I don't know, I mean, you present as white. I don't know what your ethnicity is. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah, and white from America, like I'm from Indiana. So I grew up like a typical, I would say like Midwest girl. Went to church. I always heard really bad things about Ethiopia, that it was like so super poor. And I just heard the worst of the worst because that's like what media presents. And then I went to Ethiopia and I was like, nobody told me that this is a country that like invented coffee, that has like the fastest runners in the world, that has really good vegan food, that has like a really nice culture. And Ethiopia is home to the African Union. So what that means is there's people from every country in Africa based there, and double the amount of expats because they also serve with the African Union. So it's the city I lived in, the capital is like really diverse, and so you meet people from all over the world, and it was just like a really fun living experience.
mm, right. So this Addis
Hmm.
Ababa. Hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. We were talking about this, how there's a narrative of Africa as lacking, as somehow needing, quote, the West to save it or, quote, develop it or
Yeah.
somehow like that. And I was just talking with a friend of yours yesterday, a Nigerian American woman, and she was like, how we got here is a result of colonialism,
Hmm.
this Africa that we have today that people talk about. So I guess I just wonder, like, in your experience, let's say, because you're in Ethiopia, with Ethiopian people, like, how did you see their capacity, their inner resources, their riches?
Good question. I mean, uh, I was just continually surprised with all the talent, like the skill set, um, and the opportunities there, and just also like the values. Like I always felt more alive there, is what I said, because I think that it was just like a richer community, and people really prioritize people more than time, and I think that's kind of more the way we're supposed to live. And there's just so many things that I think Ethiopians do better than the US. And now that my husband and I are raising two kids that are like Ethiopian American, we're trying to always have this conversation about what values do we want to infuse from the US and what values do we want to infuse from Ethiopia, so that they become a little bit more well-rounded, I would say.
I guess I'm thinking about that whole thing about valuing people over time or relationships, over
Yeah.
time. What's an example of that?
Probably two examples would be, like, if I'm in the US and I'm running late and I run into someone I know, I'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'll call you later. I gotta go. I'm running late for this meeting. But in Ethiopia, they'd be like, I'm running really late. So how are you? How's your mom? What are you up to? If you need something, they will drop everything and just help you. Even if it's like not super convenient timing for them, they'll just stop and help you. And probably maybe a second example is when I was working in an Ethiopian company. At first, it was really challenging for me because as an American, I was so used to getting there exactly at 9, starting my work at 9:01, not saying hi to people, like just being really like, I have to work or I'll get in trouble. And soon I realized that that was so weird to them. And it really was expected that the first 10 to 20, 30 minutes, I'm saying hi to everyone. I'm talking to them. We're having like a morning coffee together, and then work starts maybe at like 9:30. But there was like a full half hour where you're just talking and catching up with people that you saw the day before. But they were like just building relationships all day long, and taking more time to get to know each other. And I just feel like that's kind of like the better way to work, is to kind of balance that human aspect as well.
Yeah, I was having lunch with a man from who is a superintendent of schools here in where I live in Lancaster, and he was telling he's Ugandan and
Oh,
Rwandan,
cool.
and he
Uh-huh.
was telling me about how you know it's like we have to return to humanity in all
Mm.
of our institutions in like the United States, like really
Mhm.
humans at the center and human relationships. And that person who has that job at your school or your company is a person, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? And that person has ancestors. And
Uh-huh.
and so it was like it was just a whole realm of respect, um and a trust in quote productivity that can happen
Mm.
when there's this whole uh I don't know, this cocoon or this context of respect.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I fully agree. And I think for big companies, it makes a lot of sense to value their employees. I think there is like an ROI there if they wanted to look at it, but I think it just makes it's common sense as well, you know. One other thing that might be interesting in Ethiopia, when you're served food, it's like everybody eats off the same platter. So it's like a giant plate. And like you have like 6 or 7 people all eating off of it. And that also just creates like a sense of connection. Like you're not just with your own little plate, like everybody's eating off the same shared plate. And people like feed each other. And it's like just like so much love, even in like small acts like that are just like infused in the culture. And I don't have data, but I'm sure their levels of depression and loneliness and suicide, I'm sure they're a lot lower than what the US is, and partly because of that, I think.
Wow, that is a good point. And so I've eaten Ethiopian style, so with those big platters, and
Uh-huh.
it's funny because at the time that it happens, I don't really have a problem with it. But when you just
Uh-huh.
described it just now, it was like all my COVID tension came up. You know what I mean? It was like,
Yeah.
wow, this whole way of being is, I don't know how those cultures dealt with the threat of COVID or other kinds of
Yeah.
communicable diseases.
I was still in Ethiopia during COVID, and I mean, there definitely wasn't as much precautions, I would say. I mean, people still did all of this. I think the only thing we did differently was we wore a mask inside of grocery stores. But also Ethiopia and many other African countries weren't hit as hard as the rest of the world, and there's a lot of scientists trying to figure out why. But yeah, in Ethiopia, people carried on.
And I'm also thinking about Adrienne Marie Brown. She's someone who I read, and I know a lot of people in the Mother Tree community mention her. She has a book called Emergent Strategy. And one of
Hmm.
those things that she says is that it's important when you're working with like coalitions to go at the speed of trust.
Hmm.
Go at the speed of trust,
So
which
good.
which means you have to prioritize relationship
Hmm.
and getting to know each other and build trust through action, reaction, communication, falling down, repairing, you know
Yeah, yeah, that's so good. So true.
and it just makes me think about, like, for us, I feel like a lot of our narratives and what we're exposed to in television, even Jane Austen. I've been listening to a lot of Jane Austen lately. It's one of my guilty pleasures. It's like, we have this thing about, well, if it's good, if a relationship is good, then it's good. Not that it gets built towards good, or that even good
Mhm.
relationships uh, have trials, tests. People, people stumble. People are still
Mhm.
evolving. You know what I mean? So you're still going, but you have to slow down maybe to reestablish trust, or to reestablish trust with yourself.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I like that. I like the idea of reestablishing trust with yourself. That's like the first, probably the first part or the first step with trust with others.
Yeah. And to me, that takes us back to what you said, is that you need 7 to 8 hours of sleep. So that's like foundational to your trust to yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I physically break down. I have like friends who I feel like will be like, oh, I only slept 4 hours and they look fine. Like I'm not that person. Like I really cannot function without sleep or without good self-care. And I think that's kind of like a hidden blessing.
It is, because some of us have a override function
Mhm.
and we don't even know when we've kicked into override. Like, I'm just going to confess. Override, trying to be the best mom, or not the best mom, a good mom, or a good
Mhm.
partner, or a dedicated activist.
Mhm.
Just, it's so easy to slip into override.
Yeah, it is. It's really easy.
Mm. So it's like when you listen to your body, and when your body demands your attention, to like by breaking down.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. Because then once your body breaks down, it takes so much longer to repair that if you just like prevented it in the first place, it would have been, it wouldn't have happened in the first place. You would save time.
Yes, 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 yes. So go at the rate of trust. And what you just said about, if it didn't break down, then you wouldn't have to go back and repair it. What you
Mm.
just said just
Yeah.
made me, I was reading, I used to, before I slowed my company all the way down, I mean, like, I have slowed my company down to a sabbatical. But prior to that, I was reading these books. One of them is called, I don't know, I think one of them is called Slow. And it was all about these companies who are doing really well by shortening. Oh, I think it's called Short, because what these companies are doing, how they're doing well, is by shortening their work weeks, shortening their hours.
Yes. Yeah, I was actually I was having a conversation with business leaders in the Pennsylvania area this week, and that was one of the big topics was like, first, how can you give people Fridays off on the summer or half day Fridays? And then others were saying we actually moved to a 4-day work week. Um, and it made people so much happier and it really supported their employees. And it took, I think it was like everybody said it took a few weeks of adjustments and it took a while for the customers to also get on board, and then they've never looked back once they transitioned to those work weeks that are shorter.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so we got to get back to you and Cradle, because
Hmm.
you're in a startup mode. You started this company, right?
Yes, I did. Yep.
How long have you guys been around?
So we started when we were in Ethiopia, kind of like a pilot. And then once I moved back to the US last year, I officially registered it in the US. And one of the things we were talking about with these companies is that when you have some more talent on the back end, especially if it's a little bit more affordable, you can afford to give your team members that Friday off. So there is a way to make it like viable, I think, for businesses. Um, and one thing that comes to my mind is that my sister lives in the Netherlands and she's a teacher and she only teaches like 3 days a week. And that's so normal there. And nobody works 5-day work weeks. Like everybody has like 3 or 4 work days. And so there's so many countries around the world that are making shorter work weeks possible. And I think companies in the US can do that as well, whether you like work with someone like me who can give you more backup talent, or you just rearrange your organization to make it work. Yeah, it's possible. And people, I think, should move towards that.
So I love the name of your company, by the way,
Okay.
Cradle, because I have a certain association with Cradle. But you tell me, where'd you get that name?
So Africa is the cradle of humanity. It's cradle of mankind is where, everybody on this planet came from. And I didn't want, we're all about promoting good business, good travel to the continent. And so I didn't want anything that seemed too like empowering Africa or aid to Africa. Like that's like a lot of the companies that work in Africa had that kind of connotation. And we're trying to actually fight that and show that like the African continent has so much talent and so many cool products and so many cool tourist destinations. And so we wanted something that kind of reminded the world, like, this is where we came from. This is like where everything starts. This is so cool. And we really wanted to be kind of like when anybody wants to do business in Africa, they come through us. So we're like the cradle of like, kind of like the originators. Like if you want to go work in Africa, we're going to show you and point you in the right direction so that you do it in the best way possible.
Yeah, because that was my association with the word cradle too.
Yeah.
It was the cradle of civilization,
Mhm.
So I love that. I love that. And for everybody who's listening, Valerie spells cradle. Tell them how you spell cradle, Valerie.
So we spell it Crdle. So cradle without the A. To be honest, it's because that's the URL that was available. We say like Africa, put the A in cradle. So we're just going to leave it out. So it is a different spelling, but yeah, we really love the work that we're doing. And I would say probably most of our work is just like educating people on like what the continent is like and all the business you can do and reasons to think differently about it. And so that's like most of what my days are filled with.
Yeah. I just want to make sure we talked about that cradle thing. So, but I did want to follow up on short, and this whole 3-4 day work week. So here you are, a startup. You have 2 small children. You just relocated back to the United States. How many days a week do you work?
I am working 5. I would say I work on the preschool schedule. So
Mhm.
I do work like a few hours in the morning, then I go do preschool pickup and I come back and then I work during nap time. And I think from the beginning I realized like I really need good business partners. So it's not just me. And so I have a really cool like Ugandan business partner who helps me on the talent side and he's based in the UK and he's really good at like the back end part that I'm horrible at. He's really good at. And we do different kinds of business. So I always have somebody who's kind of helping support me in
Nice.
different ways. So like even another example is we are getting ready to do our first import. So we're also going to start selling this really cool coffee from Uganda. And so we found like a really good shipping company in the US that will just ship out everything for us that like connects to our website. So we pay a bit of a premium for that, but it also means I can spend my time doing what I love, which is talking about why you should buy roasted coffee from Uganda and the benefits and the people who started the brand and all of that stuff. And so yeah, I think that's how I make my business workable is by just having extra people and extra support to make it function well.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Um,
love that. I'm really glad for you. And I love hearing about
Thank
these
you.
partnerships with other African, entrepreneurs like you partnering. It just seems like alignment with what you say Cradle is about.
I think it would be, I mean, to be honest, it'd be weird if I was promoting African talent and then didn't work with African talent. Like that would be kind of like hypocritical, I think.
Yes.
So yeah, so when it comes to all of the work, everyone I partner with is from the African continent. And that's why it's so much better. And yeah, I mean, when I lived in Ethiopia, I just saw so many cool people and so many cool products and brands and businesses. And the one thing that everyone had in common was that they just needed more customers. And the US is such a big market that I was like, oh, wait, I'm American. And that could be the part I do, is that I'm just here in the US and I happen to talk about the services and I connect you to American businesses, or I help import and become the FDA person that you need on the US side to import. And so I act as that part. But, you know, everybody I work with is doing really cool things, and they're all from different African countries.
Yeah. Wow. I know this is sounding a little bit like an advertisement for your company, but I'm going deep on it because I think I think it's a good model in a lot of ways. And I love, you know, just the possibilities of real partnership, like respectful partnership.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think so much of the problem I have with kind of charity and aid on the continent is I started off in social work. So I first went to work with these nonprofits, and it was very much about Americans helping African communities. And then when I was there, I realized that so much of the charities we're doing don't really make an impact. Some of them cause damage. And the whole narrative of us helping, we're not really helping, right? Like, and it's not an equitable relationship, and it's not fair, and it does so many different horrible things. And so the part I like about business, like anywhere in the world, is it is like that win-win partnership where it's, you know, you work with really cool suppliers that you become really good friends with and that deliver really good products for you, and you have your business based on them, and so they appreciate you because they get money from you, but you make money because you work with them, and it's like a win-win. And I think it kind of resets like the balance that we need in this world with like more fair relationships and business endeavors.
Yeah. Wow. Well said. Fair relationships and business endeavors. And I think there's something really powerful about stepping out of the nonprofit context, you know, and realizing the world of business, of, you know, connecting small business to small business, um, or having your own business can be an incredible driver for change without the requirements of the nonprofit sort of industrial complex, which has so much built into it called fundraising.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I feel like you could, I mean, there's books on this, and like everyone on the continent that we work with, or that, I mean, everyone's saying that aid doesn't work. Like most of the aid doesn't work. There's like really great like African economists and like different presidents, like the Rwandan president's really against aid, and there's so much showing that it doesn't work. But good business really does make that social impact, actually, because it is creating jobs, and can even have like a good environmental impact depending on the kind of work you're doing.
Mhm.
But it's also just like it's sustainable too, because it's business. So it's not like a charity that you know, dependent on aid that comes with strings attached and can come and go. It's sustainable because you're offering a product that really works and helps people.
Mm. So we're going to take a little break from our sponsor. And when we come back, we're going to talk with Valerie about what can you, if you have a small business or a side hustle in the United States, or if you have some resources you're connected to, like how can you get involved with creating these partnerships with African talent and African companies?
Okay, so that's a great question. Let me give you two different examples. So the first is there's this amazing guy named Michael who lives in California. He's in like for the past 10 years, he wanted to start a coffee brand. And when I met him, I was like, why don't you start one? And he was like, oh, like to buy the machinery and like the packaging and all of that, that just seems too expensive and too hard. And so I connected him to this really cool Ethiopian farmer group that I know from living in Addis Ababa. And so they're farmers, they have really good coffee, they roast it, their equipment is like ISO certified, so they meet all the international standards. And they will white label it for him. So they're putting it in his packaging, and he's getting ready to do his first import and start selling coffee. And what's so cool about it is that there's so many white label suppliers on the continent where you can basically start your own brand, and you have really cool farmers or brands in Africa that make it for you, and it allows you to buy from them without having to do all of the equipment and facility yourself. And so you can get started at like a more affordable rate, but you're also doing like really cool impact because he's buying roasted coffee. So it creates like 5 times more jobs than just the green coffee. It's forested coffee, so it keeps like trees thriving. So it's like good for the environment. And it's Ethiopian coffee, so it's like really good. It's like definitely marketable here in the US. So that's kind of like one example. Like if you are an entrepreneur who wants to like white label products or start a brand, you can source from Africa. And so instead of going to like Alibaba, where you get maybe some cheap products or like there's nothing special about them, you can go to the African continent and work with brands there to get really cool products that aren't here in the US. And it's a little bit more unique. So that's like one thing if you're an entrepreneur is like the white labeling part. And the second thing is if you're like a startup or a small business and you need affordable talent, because African countries have like a lower cost of living, you can hire and pay really good wages and still have more support for your team. So for example, recently there's somebody who approached me who's in the Philadelphia area actually, and he has a startup and he needed 6 people to help make this app go live. And so we're connecting to him to like a team in Rwanda that is like super excited to work for him, and he's getting really affordable talent, and his startup is possible because he has this partnership. So like there's so many different examples, but definitely if you're a business owner or want to start a side hustle, like you can find great people to connect with in Africa.
Wow. And then if you I think you were saying talking about you're based in the United States, you're based in Pittsburgh, but you create partnerships with businesses in Canada and the UK and also with Africa?
Yeah, so when it comes to talent, like for people who want to just hire from the continent, we have clients all over the world. Most of our clients are in the UK or Europe. We have some American clients, Canadian. It's really easy to get that set up. And then for people who want to import products, we primarily are only doing that in the US because that's where we're registered, and then we have the FDA clearance and all of that stuff. But I mean, I think for somebody who really wanted to import in a different country, we could kind of show them our model and they could replicate it wherever they're living too.
Hmm. Wow. So one of the things I have to ask you, Valerie, is you don't look that old. I know you have small children. And I guess I just wonder, like, did it take a lot of confidence or guts or overcoming fear to start Cradle and to keep it going?
Um, no, I think it was that thing I had to do or I would explode. Like it was just in me, and I knew I had to do it. And it was definitely, I think, challenging when we first started to get going. Like any new business, it takes a lot of effort in the beginning. But every day I feel really like happy and excited to be doing the work I'm doing. And I mean, my days are filled with talking to people all throughout Africa and all throughout the world. And like I'm making a social impact and an environmental impact, and it's business. So it's a lot of things happening, but it like this is like the thing I knew I had to do, or else like I would just I couldn't go on. Like I just really wanted to do it so bad that I had to do it.
And I think that finally, this is like maybe my final question, but you mentioned to me that you have a degree in social work. You were trained as a social worker, and here you are in business, connecting businesses. And I think there's a lot of people in our, community who maybe have training and being in service and helping kind of professions, very heart-centered, very compassionate. So what would you say to people who about how you can live out that compassion without being, I don't know, a social worker? I'm not sure what I'm trying to say, but I feel like you've moved that passion, that compassion that you had in social work into to the arena of business.
Right. I think actually social work has influenced how I do my business in so many ways. Because first of all, social work in the code of ethics of like becoming a social worker, there's this principle that you have to follow that says, um, do no harm. And so it doesn't even tell you to do good. It just says like don't harm. And especially when it comes to working in maybe like vulnerable communities, you have to be really careful that everything you do is not going to have like a negative impact. And so I always kind of have that in my mind. And the second thing I really like about social work is there's this whole idea of people being able to choose for themselves. And so when I was a social worker, I wasn't, when I was in the US and doing social work, I wasn't coming up with the goals for my clients. It was more like the clients came up with their own goals. And then I was just like on the back end trying to support them with their resources. And so I think that's a lot about how I wanted to do work in Africa is that I was there for a decade and just heard people saying that they wanted access to market linkage and they wanted to be able to sell to the US. And so I'm just on the back end making that come possible. And I'm not pushing my idea on what they should do. It came from them, and people who want to sell to the US get in contact with me. So yeah, I think people who come from the helping profession, you want to help and make an impact. And the way you do that can be through social work, or it could become through business, or it could come in so many ways. And you can use those ethics and values that are so good in the helping professions and just use them in innovative and creative ways to create that impact.
Hmm. Wow. I feel like we can almost leave it there. But I want to give you a chance to, if people want to find out more about Cradle or more about you, Valerie, how should they get in touch with you?
Yes. Okay. So you can always go to our website, cradle.com. You can find a contact us button. You can send me a message. We have our talent, kind of like if somebody wants to hire someone, it kind of shows what we're good at connecting people to. And we are going to start selling coffee in a couple months. So anybody who wants good coffee, you can check us out there. But really, whether you want to do business in Africa or not, I think the whole idea is rethinking what we think about people and realizing that the stereotypes we hear on TV or in the media aren't correct. And that could apply to so many groups. And I happen to work in Africa, but I think it applies in so many ways. So it's just about like rethinking your world and what you've been taught. And I just hope it encourages people to try something different, go to an Ethiopian restaurant, eat some Ethiopian food, meet some new people. Just get outside of your comfort zone a little bit is what I'd encourage people to do.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Valerie. So
Thank
nice
you
to
for
have you
having
here on the
me.
Mother Tree Network. Wish you all the best with all the efforts that you're making, the partnerships you're building with African talent and resources and organizations and businesses. Keep going.
Thank you.
All right. Peace, y'all.